All right, let's take a look at how we can make these trees a little bit more realistic, particularly focusing on the tree bark and giving it a little bit of depth, basically the bump map, right? You see the one in the back here that doesn't rotate right now. I rendered that without bump map. And then here I had a little trick to enable some bump map. And then, of course, you can go into the new material properties. And you see this tree here has bark, trunk, and leaves, two materials. So on the bark trunk, if you have a bump map, you can adjust here how much of that bump map is prevailing, how much it's showing, right? 0 will make it look flat like the original. But it doesn't do that by default, right? The original model doesn't do that. Let me explain. When you go into the default collection here, let's start from scratch actually. Let's go something like this. You go to render, geometry. You know there are a number of trees there. That's where we started with that geometry viewer. And let's take, for example, the one I had was oak tree C. I'm going to take oak tree B. And when that one's loaded, let's go move it with the right button a little bit to the side. And then let's come in closer to the bottom, to the trunk. And we can see there is a little bit of content, a little bit of coloring, but it doesn't look very, we cannot see that bark stand out so much. Let's see if I can move it a little bit to the right. There you go. Okay, so maybe zoom in a little bit more. There. And so as you rotate, if you turn the light, you can see there is a texture on it, but it doesn't give you a bit of depth or like what the bump map should add. And so how can we fix that? Well, if we look at the material file, actually, if you look at the directory where your howler is installed, you'll have probably program files, say x86, howler. I call it actually howler 2024. I'm not sure if that's the default folder name, but there's a geometry subdirectory and the foliage subdirectory. So that's where we have all these trees, and of course a number of tree bark and tree stumps and branches and so on. There's also a mushroom. There's some textures there. And if you look for the oak tree, there it is. There's an oak tree B and there's an oak tree B OBJ. So that's the OBJ file. In fact, the previewer in Windows will show it to you after a little while. It's quite a large file. It might be easier to just preview, double click it to open it in perhaps the 3D viewer. You have a couple of ways to view it. All right, so this one here is fairly simple. That's first tree 04, but it does have a texture. And there is a material file, first tree MTL. So when you open that one, all of these will typically have, it may not have the material. Oh, this one actually has it already. This one has a bump, right? So some of them don't have the bump map. And let's take a look at that oak tree I had a little bit earlier here. Where's my oak tree 1? There's some branch. Oak tree there, oak tree C, right? So if I look at this oak tree, it does have some texture, but the original had just the texture. It didn't have anything else, such as a bump map. Right, and indeed here you don't see it either. Now I don't know if that's because this viewer doesn't do bump maps, but we can see in the material properties, so that's oak tree C, and here's the materials, oak tree C. I added this bump map. So the original had just this, right, for the first material. There's two materials, the bark trunk, and then there's the leaves. And so focusing on the bark trunk, you can see that there is the texture. That's the map, and if you look at the description that we have in our on the website, at thebest3d.com 2024, and you look for the PBR description here, the physics-based rendering, that gives you an idea of what are the physics-based material that you can play with. Not absolutely all of them are implemented yet, but it's getting there gradually. And in particular, we have bump being mentioned here. That's the scalar, and so that's the one we actually play with in the interface. When you go from 0 to 1 on the bump, that's the scalar. And as we say, it might also work with bump if you have a bump map. So this one here is a map. That's the whole list of parameters that need a map. And so if you have a bump map, you can actually use the one you also use for the diffuse color, right? So the KD, map KD is what we should have. Sure enough, here, map KD, that's the diffuse coloring from the texture map. Well, you can also just duplicate that and make it the bump map at the same time. And it'll be nicely correlated because wherever the colors change, you probably want to see a little bit of a bump. And so that's a good way to kind of cheat it. And trick it into BUMP, bump, lowercase, capitalized, doesn't matter. I think it takes both. And there may be a parameter here that says how much of that bump we have, the KN. I don't know if we have it actually here. Nope, doesn't have it. But it doesn't matter. Even if we don't have it in here, it will be added in our material editor. So it will then allow you to save that with, display it with the bump map, right? So this one here is a different model. We didn't have the bump map on this one. Let me go back out of it and start again, render geometry. And this time I'm going to display it more on this side. So here's the foliage. Which one was that? The oak tree B, I think. So let's look for oak tree B. And as soon as it's loaded, we should see it. Oh, I didn't get to load it. Double click it. There you go. It's loading. Done. So now you can move it to the side. You can bring it in a little bit closer. And you can see it doesn't have a bump map there yet. And whereas when I look at the one that I was editing a little bit earlier, oak tree C, now that one does. So when you zoom into this, you'll notice there's a little bit more depth, a little bit more definition to that, and that's exactly what I'm talking about. So here you can now see how it looks. It doesn't look so flat, right? Here you see the textures, but it still appears flat, whereas here you have a little bit of graininess and depth, and that's exactly what the bump map should give you. And so if we let me move it over here to the right a little bit, there you go, bring it in a little bit closer. And so now if I turn the lights around here, there's definitely some bump mapping on that too. Let me turn it so there's only one light showing. Maybe I turn this one black. So we have just one light source. And you can see when it's coming from the side that along this shadow ridge here, that there are sometimes you'll see them. You know, it's like when you look at the moon, like the half moon, along the shadow line, you'll see some craters or parts of them. And that's coming from the bump map. You can zoom into that. So one thing I'm going to do is play with that bump amount now, right? So we can go to the material properties here, and the bark trunk material is the one we're editing, so we should be able to change this. For example, a little bit of emissive color, that won't hurt it, a little bit kind of a yellow or light brown, and you see it's making it brighter. Now that's a little bit too much, so I'm not going to give any emissive actually, or barely any, but the diffuse color we could make it a little bit more yellowish. And so it gets a little bit more of that tint, or maybe even reddish. Right, so here we're playing with those material properties, and now you have a much more reddish appearance here. Maybe that's too much. Let's go like this. And so now the roughness, right? So we want also a little bit of reflection, perhaps. If it's like wet wood or, I don't know, oily, or, you know, it should reflect the environment a little bit. So we need to first pick an environment, maybe one preferably with some earth colors on the bottom and some sky colors at the top. So that can add a little bit of extra lighting, and now it's time to go play with that. We can change the roughness here so we can actually see some of that reflection, especially if you give it a metallic look. You can see it appearing to reflect here. And if you disperse it a little bit with a higher roughness here, it's not going to show that environment too well, but you can still see that there is something to it. And most importantly now, down here, the bump. Right? So if you bring it down to 0, the amount of bump, that's the multiplier now. Whatever the bump map says, it's not going to be seeing it. So it still have the coloring, but the bump that's added to it is gone. Whereas now you can adjust with that. You can play it and give it a little bit of bump or a lot more. And of course, we still have also the clear coat and some other factors here. But yeah, so that's something I wanted to add to you. You know, if you need those trees to be even more realistic, be sure to add the bump in case that's not already in the material file. You simply go to the folder where you have it installed and down to the geometry folder, and you'll find your trees. Let's pick one more, maybe the mushroom. Let's see. There's some other trees. Let's see. I want to get a simple tree, one that's kind of has a simple shape. Basic tree. That's the material file. Basic tree 03. So that's a fairly simple tree. And you see the clip mask, there's a clip map, but it's not being used in this viewer, whereas in Howler we actually use it. Now, one thing I don't know is whether we already have a bump map. We might actually have a bump map on this one already. So let's see, that's the basic tree 03. Basic tree 03 is this one, and then we have the material file. And yep, there it is. It already has a bump map, right? So it's great. I mean, in some cases, you don't even have to go into this file. You can already play with it. In fact, let's go double check on that. Let's go load basic tree 03. Now, why do I lose this every once in a while? I'm not quite sure. I can't seem to find my C drive after that. So I'll just exit and clear this. Come on. and then I'll go back into render geometry, and it opens it for you right there. So you're on the program files. See, you're on this Windows. Oh, I need to go to Windows. That's it. Windows, my SSD. My C drive is the Windows SSD. And then so you'll find the Howler subdirectory where it's installed. Go down to geometry, go to foliage, and basic tree 03. This one here, double click that. And so indeed we have the clip mask being used, right, as expected. And we also see a bump map already there. Let me zoom in a little bit. So something like this here. So we can really look at that bump map in a bit more detail on the trunk there. And there you go. And so now as you turn this around, you have the lighting coming from one side, and you can see this trunk because they have a nice bump map on that. And if it's too much, well, what you do is you reduce it. But first of all, let's make sure we have an environment map, and then go to the material properties. Make sure we work on the bark. And so we might want to make this bark a little bit more greenish, something like this. And so that should give it a little bit of a change, not very intense in this case, perhaps a little bit of reddish emissive color too. That brought it up a little bit brighter here, but now you can see that the bump is at maximum, and you can reduce it and bring it back up higher. So that's where it's interesting to work with that bump map to get some extra definition and depth to that bark. All right, so let's see if I bring it down on the clear coat. I just want to have a tiny little bit clear coat here. That's too much. There. And then the metallic. So now you can also add that environment reflection map, and the roughness, bring it down to 0 or have it still pretty strong. But most importantly, the bump map here. That will that will really help giving it some extra detail. And so now if you turn the light source around, of course, you get all the benefits together here. All right, so I just wanted to show you that. Some of the trees already have the bump map. Let's see if we can find one that doesn't have it. You know, that looks a little bit flat. This one probably has it. It looks like it has some definition here, right? You can see that. So if you go into the material properties, indeed, if you reduce, there you go. You can see that it's changing when you play with that bump amount. That means there is already a bump map defined on there. Let's go first tree. See if that one, yep, that one definitely has it too. Let's find one of the complex, maybe the mushroom. Let's see the mushroom. Okay, so that one probably doesn't have a bump map yet. It looks like it's not. Yeah, it's giving a little bit of a coloring there, but it's. Let me enable the other light. So we have two lights here. Yeah, so we have a color map, but we don't like a texture map for the diffuse colors, but we don't seem to have a bump map. So let's go do the exercise here for the bump to add the bump map to the mushroom. So we go here, we find ourselves that mushroom. It's a little bit down here. There, mushroom. Where's the? No, that's the juniper tree. Next one of the OBJ files. Oak tree, mushroom. Where's my mushroom OBJ? What's the name of it here? Oh, shroom, not mushroom, it's a shroom. Okay, so we need to look for S there. So there is the shroom 1A material, shroom 1A OBJ, right? So if we open that here, there you go. That's in the Windows preview or in the 3D viewer. And sure enough, the material file, there it is. This one has the diffuse map, but it doesn't have the bump map. So let's just add that right there for the base and then also for the bottom and the other parts. How many materials are there? It looks like there are 3 materials here. All right, so let's go put this in here. And then this one, put that in there. So each of those will receive an additional map, which is the exact same map as what's used for the diffuse color. But as a trick here, we simply replace this now with bump, right? And then we'll take that also here, and we'll take it also here. So all 3 materials will now have, in addition to their respective colors, different texture maps. They also have the same respective one for the bump. So there's the top, mushroom bottom, and what's this one? Mushroom generic seamless. That's probably the side. I don't know. Let's go save that and reload the same file. So let's see if I can remember now. What was it? What was the name of that? For some reason I can never seem to remember. It's got to be Windows something. Okay, well, let's just do it the easy way. Let's go and clear this. Remember how this one doesn't have much depth. Let's go to render and geometry and look for that mushroom again. So there's the where's the foliage, and it's the shroom there. Okay, and so now look at that difference. Look at how you now have much more depth there, and that's because we now have the bump map on it. All right, let's go adjust how much bump map we see. So we have the base, we have the bottom, we have the top. Remember, this is a new feature. It's showing the name of the materials, right? So it's perfect. We can say we want the top, and you want to reduce that bump amount, keep a little bit of it, maybe increase the metallic amount. Now, we don't have the environment map defined yet, so let's go find that right here. And there it is. Now we have the blue sky reflecting on there too. There you go. So same thing here. Those parts are also now much more pronounced and refined with the bump map added, which we didn't have initially. All right, hope that's going to help you get some extra renderings, and we'll see you next time.